You might know, some of you, that last year for Heritage Week I created the Cork Jewish Culture Virtual Walk, which was a short film and a web page about the Cork Jewish history and culture. So after that, I was contacted by loads of people, I don't know, more than 100, some who were born in Cork, some who had ancestors from Cork, or some who just had an interest in the Jewish history of Cork. So some of those people are here today and are going to be presenting later on. So I'm just really happy to welcome you all. Today you're going to hear stories from people who grew up in Cork. You're going to hear music from Cork's Jewish past and present. This is the Cork Jewish Times from 1949, which I bought from a rare bookseller, Jonathan Fishburne, in London. Just over 30 years ago, in November 1918, I left Cork to take up a position in the London Custom House. It seems hardly possible to convey to the Jewish youth of present-day Cork any adequate impression of the characters that made up the community of those days and the conditions under which they lived. Although even then quite a number of families had drifted into other parts of the city, the majority still lived in Hibernian buildings, Monterey Terrace, Eastville and adjoining streets, which you'll know was commonly known as Jewtown. Some idea of the community's centrality may be gleaned by the existence at that time of a Vochadik Minyan at 14 Eastville and of 3 or 4 Jewish grocery shops in the same neighbourhood. Perhaps the most significant change is in the type of personality that was dominating element in the congregation. When you looked around in shul, you saw a number of elderly men, devout, grey-bearded, and bearing on their lined faces the marks of a grim struggle for existence. Most of them were Talmudic scholars. They had brought with them a deep understanding and knowledge of Judaism. When they davened, they expressed the fervour of their prayers in a manner that comes only from an abiding faith.
I was born in 1940 to what I call typical Jewish family in a lovely home in Woolhara Park, Douglas Road.
We lived on Weston Road at Annaville in one of the houses there. It was a wonderful childhood. Certainly up to 13, it was a wonderful childhood. We had holidays every year in Tramore. I went to school at Christian Brothers College.
We were always very, very proud of being Jewish, even in the small community.
Most people who are hearing me are hearing probably an American accent, and my family kid me a lot about that, but I can prove that I was from Cork by saying this. Aru from Cork, I am Arud, you ate spuds I do to you. How do you eat them? Skin and all? Do they choke you? Not at all.
I suppose what we're doing is trying to remember the old community, but also, in Lawrence's word, to give energy and time to the upkeep and organisation of the community in its present form today.
Yeah, our school was a mixed school, very strict. For those days, I guess it was normal that we used to sit with our backs straight. We couldn't touch the back of the chair. Nobody would dare open your satchel or open your desk.
The surgery that my family ran, and it was also my grandparents' house, there were 4 brothers and they all practiced dentistry there. And most people will remember the Shurs as the dentists of Cork.
My father was Arthur Elian, my mother Betty Mushat from Dublin, who was the first Jewish woman solicitor to qualify in Trinity College.
Except for the few Jewish friends that I had, like Gail Hurwitz, Marion Wheeler, and sure, there were very few. Already in the 1940s, 50s, I had very few Jewish girl friends. Most of my friends were either Protestants from my school or my Catholic neighbors.
I had great Irish friends in Cork, and of course we had wonderful Jewish family. The Ellions were very close, the Jacksons, etc.
My best friends were non-Jewish, Catholic and Protestant, and were so respectful of us, of our culture, as we were of their cultures. We got on as though there was no difference between us.
Then we had B'nai Akiva, and we all joined, from the smallest to the smallest to the biggest. David Jackson started when he came back from Israel, and it was marvelous. And that's, I guess, when I realized that I wouldn't be staying in Cork, and realized I would be going to Israel at some stage, and that is exactly what happened. I've lived in Israel now for 57 years.
My parents wanted me to have a Jewish education, and decided to send me to Carmel College, which is in London, just north of London. And I left at the age of 13, just after my bar mitzvah, which I had in Cork.
We were on the beach from morning till night. And that's the sandcastle further up, and we had the Marys, and we had the ice cream. I think the first time we had wafer ice cream, I think, was in New York. I remember. And I didn't know how to swim yet. So my father said one day, go into the water, here are water wings. We had water wings in those days. I put the water wings on and bravely stepped into the waves. And of course I was knocked down by the waves, swallowed all this water, but in 5 days I knew how to swim. And from that day on, I've been almost swimming daily. So there we go.
I remember in particular going to Shoal Percy Diamond's davening was just uplifting. To this day, I've been to many shoals. There aren't many as uplifting as his Kol Nidre.
That was actually the center of our life. And that's where we used to smell the bread on Yom Kippur.
I know when I was quite young, the community was still thriving. And I remember the so-called cheder was in the building next to the shoal, which by that stage was like dowdy and old. And I used to hate going in there. I used to always think that a mouse would jump up on top of me. And we used to have a teacher who came down from Dublin. One day he decided to shochet a chicken and took us all out to see him killing the chicken. And another time he did matzah baking with us. One thing I remember in particular about the Jewish community was when the male voice choir came to Cork. To this day, it was the most wonderful experience. They came to Shoal, they took part in the service. I can remember sitting upstairs in the front and being fair, blue-eyed, did not look Jewish at all. I was getting the funniest looks, and they were wondering what I was doing, looking at a siddur, until they found out eventually who I was. When I was quite young, the community was still thriving. As Estelle reminded me today of our big Hanukkah party, I must have been about 3 or 4, and we all dressed up as candles, and we had a big party afterwards. But that's really, I would say, the last big celebration. There were a few of us. There was Rosalind Cohen, Sammy Cohen, there were the Rose Hills, really just a few. There was Pearl Nathan. I remember all the characters, Jack Livingstone, Fanny Goldwater, Percy Diamond. I have the happiest memories of living in Cork. And even if I go rare times and I go back now, I still feel like a 2-year-old when I get off the plane and feel so comfortable being there.
So 35 years later, I came back to Cork from Tampa, and that particular house, which had 5 stories with the place that they make dentures at the in the basement had been turned into a bed and breakfast. So of course I decided that we had to stay there. The implant, I use that both as a dental term and another term, of my father's chair in his surgery, which was now a bedroom, was still there. And there were bulges over each of the doors where they had left the mezuzahs. And I asked Claire, what, are those mezuzahs there? And she said, I don't know what they mean, but it was something Jewish, so we thought we'd keep it. Anyway, she cut one off one of the doors for me as a keepsake. It was really a wonderful time.
The new Cork Jewish community is active and has at the moment Zoom services every second Friday night, and we're looking for a space that when we can get together in bigger numbers that we can have celebrations other than on Zoom. But in the meantime it's quite active, and there's a website, corkjewishcommunity.ie, and there's quite a lot going on. We'll be having some cultural events as well as religious events coming up, and Jews from all denominations welcome.
My grandfather was the rabbi. He was Reverend Joseph Wallman between 1926 and 1937. And at the very beginning of 1927, my mother was born in Cork. My memories are really just of the stories from my parents.
Blanche Wallman wrote, "Daddy used to wear a clerical collar which made him look similar to the Catholic priests. One day a couple of Catholic girls saw him coming, got down on their knees and crossed themselves, then looked up and ran off crying, 'Oh my God, it's the rabbi.'